Okay, in this video, we are going to put back together and tune the CRKT Trask, which is their deadbolt lock. This is probably what I'd consider one of the most malaligned knives that I've seen reviews. What I noticed was the excitement came from the deadbolt lock, which is where this pin passes through the blade. For a very secure knife, it's got D2 steel, it's got a great blade, it's got good ergonomics. It's a little bit thick, but most of the complaints from the reviewers that I found had to do with that the knife was very uncentered and difficult for them to adjust. And what I found was, for me, not indicating for anyone else, that it was a combination of the pivot tension as well as the detent tension. And this knife has an adjustable detent bar, which we will see as we put it back together. So I have dismantled the knife. I have cleaned all the parts. It was pretty grimy inside. So now we're going to work on putting it back together. And then once it's back together, we can have a discussion about adjusting the detent and finding that kind of happy medium between it being relatively centered as well as very smooth, but not so loose as to just shake itself out. Okay, so hang tight. We're going to come back down to it. Very centered, very smooth. No blade play at all. Okay, so we've reassembled the bulk of the knife. All we have left to put back in is the lock and the lock release. And so what we notice right now is we are pretty well centered, maybe just off a hair towards the tension bar side. But when we attach the when we adjust the, the detent bar, once we adjust the detent bar, it tends to push just a little bit on the blade. So we're going to see how bad that is. But the trick here is that the pivot actually has to be adjusted with a flathead screwdriver. Okay, so you have to take the lock out of the lock side. Okay, so once you unscrew the button, it releases the spring, the lock just falls out. Okay, that's where you adjust the pivot. I'm sure most people know this, but I'm just pointing it out in case people don't. So in order to re-engage the lock, you put the lock bar in there, and then you're going to take your button side, get just a tiny bit of Loctite on it. Try not to use too much because I don't know how many times I'm going to have to disassemble. This does take a T10. But this button will not adjust at all the pivot. It literally just screws through with the spring and pulls on that lock bar. So when the lock bar drops down into the knife, like that, it pops up and raises up. Now you can adjust it a little bit in terms of how far you would like that button to be sitting up. And it does adjust as you back off a little bit, pulls that just a little bit deeper. Okay, so you can see we're still sitting just a hair to this side, and we have not nearly enough detent to make that functional, right? Just drops out, okay? Obviously it's nice and smooth. So now it's time to do a little adjusting on the detent and see whether or not, and the detent screw is right through here. And as we turn it clockwise, it will put more tension on the detent. And we'll actually push the blade just a hair towards the pocket clip side. And what we're trying to find is that happy medium between a good detent, that the blade doesn't just shake itself out, but still able to close fairly easily. And then here we have it, pretty darn centered. Could it be over just a hair? Possibly. Now, so what we want to do first is we want to get our detent to where we like it. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, what I can do is take the button off with the spring, remove that, flip it over. Now, as I adjust this blade, as I loosen it, the blade will drop back towards the pocket clip side. So I want to be careful and get it just where we want it. This takes 3 or 4 tries to get it how you like it. But once it's there, everyone's happy. So it does take that extra step of taking that button out. That's tight. I'll loosen it just a hair. So it drops nice and deep. Buttons raised, but not past the edge. Oh. All right, so it's not going to be just drop shutty. Going to have to give it a little bit of effort, but still. I don't think there's any complaints about that from a centering standpoint. From a smoothness, listen. Locks up nice. It's got a little detent here at the end. See where it pulls in. I suspect if I slang it hard enough, it would come out, but that's pretty good. Oh, see? Pretty happy with that. Now, in the past, I've had, as I've used it, the pivot is kind of loosened. That's why I wanted to take it apart, clean it, put some Loctite on it, let it sit overnight, let it really cure down. Pretty happy with this overall. So I don't know if that helps or if that's enjoyable for anyone, but I do think that with the deadbolt lock on this knife, with its size, I think, and the fact that you can get it at a really good deal right now, I think is pretty spectacular. Now, granted, it's not a high-end knife, right? This thing, when it first came out, was a little over $100. I picked this up at Knife Center for, I think it was under $50. Look at the hand, the ergonomics, the fullness, the thickness of the blade. It is super, super sharp. Let's see if we can find something to do some slicing on. How about this? That's pretty impressive. It's got a good blade shape. Don't need to have the huge writing there. I don't mind having the Trask. That's okay. So there we have it. I hope this has helped some people in terms of tuning it. Definitely would recommend, if you got this knife, breaking it down, cleaning it. There was a ton of gunk on the bearings and on the blade itself, where the bearings are captured, because they're captured pivot, I guess. Thank you guys. I hope that you enjoyed that. Hope it was helpful. And join me if you want to see more content. I am not a knife reviewer. I am simply an enthusiast that enjoys playing with knives and taking them apart and adjusting and making upgrades and that type. But there you have it, the CKRT Trask with the deadbolt lock, FRN handles, D2 steel, and nicely centered. Very, very smooth. Pretty good detent for this style lock system. Adjustable detent, which is pretty unusual. Great action. Good blade thickness, good ergonomics, very hand-filling. Thanks for joining us today, and hit that subscribe button. See you soon.